Hello and welcome to the Wednesday, August 28th edition of the Cluster API Office Hours, a subproject of SIG Cluster Lifecycle. If you have any items you want to discuss, please go ahead and add them to the agenda. I'm linking that in the chat now. To start off with, I wanted to give everybody another update on the face-to-face. If you are planning on attending, please do RSVP with the link in the agenda doc. If you don't, we may not be able to fit you in the room that day. We are limited on seating. There's also a link to the document where we're working on a proposed agenda for the face-to-face. And if you are attending, there's yet one more link related to any dietary restrictions you may have for lunch or dinner if you're planning on attending those days. Does anybody have questions on the face-to-face? Nope. All right. Then next, let's move on to the V1 Alpha 2 provider status. Do we have anybody that could speak to the Bootstrap provider for KubeADM?
I think Chuck had a couple updates in the on the channel. I don't know if it would be worthwhile to pull those in, maybe. Sorry, in the Cluster API channel.
Okay. All right. It looks like Moshe is finishing up work on pull request number 153. I think that's related to having each of the CA certificates in an individual secret versus a single secret. Chuck is working on pull request number 177, which is, let me see, calculating the cert hashes and verifying so that we can verify the CA certificates instead of skipping validation. He also said release work is starting to get fleshed out. We're working on trying to automate building and publishing of the images. All other PRs are mostly nice to have otherwise. All right. Let's see. For CAPD, let's see, Chuck's update. I said nothing interesting. Folks are just testing, and it's working on some Kubernetes distributions and not others. Docker for Mac is currently a little bit problematic. So that seems to be it for CAPD. All right, on Kappa, is this you, Vince, that had these?
Yeah, added this. We fixed an issue where the exponential backoff will last 10 billion years if it would continue to return an error. And this actually needs to be backported to the release 03. I'll try to backport the change today before we release this week or next week. And on master, Bazel and the vendor folder have been removed. And for Cap as well, we're targeting release this Friday for V1 Alpha 2.
All right, thank you. Do we have anybody who can speak to the Google provider?
I can speak to it, but I have nothing to say, I'm afraid. I mean, no real progress.
All right, thanks, Justin. OpenStack provider.
Yeah, I can say something. So we merged the V1 Alpha 2 controllers, and we're also using the Kubernetes Bootstrap right now. Those two are merged, and yeah, examples mostly work, but I didn't get to it yesterday after cluster kernel was merged to get it completely working. I think there are also not really published images of the cluster API controller and everything else right now yet. So yeah, I think I'll wait for those and then like just test everything. And it will work mostly.
Yeah, we do indeed have a little bit of a chicken and egg today without having the published images for the Bootstrap provider and the core cluster API controllers. All right. Next up is CapV. I don't see Andrew or Andrew. I don't know if you can speak to that, Travis.
No, I don't really have any updates there. I haven't been focused on it over the last week.
All right, great. I'll try to see if I can dig up updates, and I'll try to get them added to the agenda afterwards. All right, CapZ, the Azure provider. I don't see anybody there. I know they do have some, they have started looking at implementing it. But I do not know how far they've got along. All right, MetalCube, Michael? Nope.
Hey, found the
Yeah.
button. No progress to report from MetalCube so far.
All right, thank you. For the cluster API upgrade tool, we haven't made any progress there yet. We've been mostly focused on the V1 Alpha 2 work for core cluster API, the Bootstrap provider, and the AWS provider. Once we get the release out, we should be able to start better enumerating what the work is to do to get that updated next week, hopefully. All right, and Vince, can you give an update on ClusterCuddle?
Yeah, the PR to add support for like the pivot phase and the create workflow has been merged. The delete workflow hasn't been tested yet, so expect like other PRs to come after we release. But the pivot has been tested from the New Relic folks. We did some like tests on Zoom like last week, so that has been working fine. So ClusterCuddle is also like agnostic right now, so you can have one build and point it to any provider CRDs, and it will just work.
Yeah. Any other updates for providers on V1 Alpha 2 that I missed? All right. Let's move on to the core cluster API PSAs. We are targeting to cut a release this Friday. So barring any major issues, we should be able to get the ClusterCuddle binary released and get the initial images up for that. Bazel and vendor have been removed. So hopefully nobody has any major issues related to that. If you do, please raise them ASAP. That brings everything more in line with the standard KubeBuilder model and the other repositories that we had. We've finished the upgrade to controller runtime and tools version 2, the GA release of that. So we're no longer using pre-release versions for that. And we're still working on getting down the process for pushing container images after each PR merge. So hopefully this will help out with iterative development after the release, so that people can start consuming the latest tag based on from the staging bucket directly if you're trying to test newer changes. And it looks like somebody added in there, congratulations to VMware on, let me see if I can pronounce this right, Tanzu.
That was me. Congrats, guys.
Thanks, Justin. All right. Any questions there about the Cluster API PSAs? All right, looks like somebody added an item related to cluster certificates, documentation, and convention.
Yeah, I added it, but I saw Moshe was online, and I kind of wanted to like try to see if like we can like get the synchronous discussion that have been a back and forth on the PR straightened out during this meeting, so that we can move it along. I can
Sure.
share my screen, or somebody else can share their screen if we want to get all this done. Because there's also like the cluster, the kubeadm like work that needs still to be coded up and like tested in copy, which is blocked on this. Yeah.
Okay, you want to share your screen?
Yeah. So there has been some comment for those like who don't know like what this work does. It just like sets like a document for kind of like having like standards like around like how like we manage certificates and where do we expect the certificates to be found. Moshe has been like mostly like pushing this forward, and thank you very much like for doing this in so little time. So this is related to the kubeadm PR to split the certificates in multiple and just not use like one for all of them. And the naming convention that we're trying to use is cluster name dash what the certificate is, in this case CA, SCP, proxy, and SA. So Jason, did you have any other comments here, like apart from these?
Most of that was just some nits around the specific verbiage, making sure that we're clear on that. It's not anything that I would consider blocking the PR, maybe something that we can easily fix up in post. I did call out the SA key pair is different from the other one, so we may want to call that out separately. I'm not familiar enough with Cert Manager myself to know how that would be handled differently if creating those with Cert Manager for just a normal public-private key pair versus an actual self-signed certificate authority.
So I don't know if Cert Manager can actually create those, but I also don't think it would be necessary for Cert Manager to create those, because there wouldn't really be, there's no chaining, there's no value in creating those externally. So,
Yep.
But I think maybe we just call that out and make it explicit in the documentation, so that we can definitely do. I think the label requirement is probably something we should put to bed, though, one way or the other.
So around this, like, who's going to like create this label? Is the controller? Is the user expected like to create the label? Cert Manager?
So the user or Cert Manager is expected to create it.
Can Cert Manager create this label for us?
It might not be able to do it today, but updating it to add support for adding labels onto certificates should be a fairly trivial fix to push to Cert Manager. The only reason why it's really there is that I'm not aware of any other way to kind of get the secrets without getting all of them. So if you do a cluster prefix, you would have to list all of the secrets and then filter them. But if you're listing the secrets, potentially you're going to trigger events or something else that might make things not ideal.
Mm-hmm. So
I don't know if I'm overcomplicating it.
We're using like a must statement here, so I expect that like we cannot proceed it. Like these certificates are not there. Is that correct?
So if they are not there, then they get generated.
From
so if you,
okay, thank you.
So this is only if you want to feed them into kubeadm. If you want kubeadm or the Bootstrap provider to generate them, then you just don't provide them.
I see. I mean, I don't have strong opinions on this. We can always, I mean, I guess like we could remove it, but like if we say must, like that's kind of like a break and change. And if we need to add support for Cert Manager, like this convention will only work for now, like for the KubeADM and Bootstrap provider. So I would make that clear at least.
So I would think that we'd rather put this in and then prevent a breaking change down the line. So the breaking change would be easier to stomach now than in V1 Alpha 3 or even in beta stage.
Okay.
But also, it's not. If there's strong opinions, otherwise, I'm happy to just do it by prefix as well.
Well, I mean, it's already prefix, right? Like that's the convention.
Yeah. But with the limitations. So if you go, I'm looking at this from like a security auditing perspective, and if I were auditing views on the secrets, I wouldn't want Cluster API to view all the secrets all of the time. I would want to be a little bit more restrictive as to what it views. And maybe that's possible to do it, not actually to get the list of names and not the values. But I think that potentially overcomplicates something that is quite simple with just the label.
So one question that I would have there is, would the auditing requirement that you're mentioning be alleviated also if we limited to the same namespace as the cluster resource is?
So I think we're doing that already, but if I have 100 clusters in a namespace, I'm now going to be listing 400 or 500 secrets on every reconcile leap, and triggering audit events for each one of those.
Well, so we would be potentially having, I don't necessarily know that we would be querying all of them. Yeah, it's.
I mean, like this is
The label does simplify querying. The only thing that I worry about is whether or not, because we don't require labels on a lot of the other components, if we're changing up user expectations if they're creating these themselves.
Yeah, I mean, we can say it's one way or the other, right? Like you would need the cluster name to have a cluster name in here, I guess. So you need a cluster to use the certificates anyway. But the other way around, like I can also see like that label, it's like not required elsewhere. And there's like an open issue to fix that maybe in a future iteration, but like out of the scope for this discussion. I want to point out that like these are 4 certificates that we're talking about. I know the list might be better, but technically we could just do 4 get calls and just get like each of them individually. And that's like kind of like solves both of the issues.
Yeah, I can do that as well.
All right. So I think we agreed to drop the label for now, and then we can revisit later. And
yep.
Sounds good. All right.
Were there any other discussions on that?
I don't think so.
All right. All right. It looks like, Michael, you have some here that you're still working on the drain patch?
Yeah, we're close to release, so I got pulled in some other things. Got delayed on that, but still going to happen.
All right, great. Thank you. Any other topics before we move on to the triage and issue grooming? All right. In that case, let me go ahead and share my screen. If I can find the right one. All right. So let me narrow things down to the V1 Alpha 2 milestone. We have 24 that are open right now. Let's see, do we have anything that isn't triaged? I don't see anything. All right. Conformance test for clusters with cluster API enabled. I am thinking at this point we can bump that from this milestone unless there are any objections. Okay, I'll go ahead and move that one to next. All right. Full machine edits for unsupported edits.
I think
Right.
this might be related to the webhook validation that we still have to do.
Yeah. All right. So I don't think we scoped whether we're going to try to get that in place as part of a follow-on for the 02X release, or if we wanted to do it to next. So I'll just move it to 02X. All right. Make sure documentation is clear that machine deployment is the right model for disruption style machine updates. We're definitely not going to get to this for V1 Alpha 2, so I will go ahead and move this one to next. All right. Document how providers should deploy shared CRDs. So this is something that is still yet to be done. So we definitely need to tackle this. All right. Added deployment guide for adding a development guide for cluster API. So I don't think we're going to get this in before Friday. So I'll just bump it to 02X for now. All right. Let's see, document machine set, machine deployment, and machine class. All right. I think probably 02X at this point. All right. Document version matrix in provider getting started documentation. So I think this is already a requirement that we have on the individual providers. This says adding it to the Git book though, so I think we should probably still keep it for 02X as we get the updates in for that. Bootstrap cluster cleanup is not taking effect. This is likely related to some of the cluster cuddle work that you did, Vince. What are your thoughts here?
This is actually still broken. Yeah, needs to be investigated.
All right, I'll bump it to 02X for now.
Sounds good.
Right. Don't abort cluster creation when applying the add-on field. This is another one. I don't think that's anything that should block the release on Friday, though, so I'm just going to bump it. CRDs should not be deleted if I was using existing cluster as a bootstrap cluster. going to bump this one to 02x as well. Upgrading to V1 Alpha 2.
I think this can be closed because Liz work just merged.
All right. V1 Alpha 2 infrastructure provider. Wait, is that the right one? No. Update the, wait, where are we?
I think you're the one below.
Okay,
Doc.
yep. Update glossary doc with terminology. I'm going to go ahead and bump this for now. All right, update provider implementation guide to QBuilder 2.0. How far out do you think we are on trying to get some of the documentation in place, Vince?
All docs were probably going to be at 02x.
All right.
I mean, we don't need a new release, but we know that we're not going to do it in 2 days.
Yeah. Version naming schema for CAPI and providers. I really doubt we're going to gain any type of consensus in this before tomorrow or before Friday, so I'm going to go ahead and bump this to next. All right, V1 Alpha 2 infrastructure provider scaffolding. All right, I'm going to bump this to 02x. Let's see. Machine cluster reference should be required.
Let's go to next.
All right, publish images from master after each merge. I'm going to go ahead and bump this to 02x just because it's not a blocker on the release fence.
Yeah.
All right, Bootstrap cluster cleaned up despite fail pivot. I don't think this is anything we're going to address before Friday, so 02x. All right, let's see, separate client versus provider API endpoints field, or separate client, okay. We didn't really get to the point where we're going to get any consensus on this by Friday, so since it's requiring API type changes, let's go ahead and bump it to next. All right, decide on and document how infrastructures providers should or must handle permanently failed servers or VMs. All right. This is probably something that might be nice to see if we can sort out. So I'll take a look and see where the state is of that, and we can follow up on it. All right, let's see. Enable optional use of local Kubernetes API connection in Node-RED controller. What are your thoughts on this one, Vince?
We should bump it. This is like a pretty large change at this point. So 02x.
All right. See, add a field on cluster status indicating control plane is ready.
You can assign this to me. I can take care of it before release, even if it doesn't do anything.
All right, sounds good. All right, let's see. cluster controller should create the kubeconfig secret for remote clusters. That's something that we definitely want to get in before Friday. Ensure proper handling of error message and error reason for reference resources.
Yeah, this has a PR up, but doesn't have to go before Friday, I guess. It's not blocking. It's mostly like nice to have.
All right, let's go ahead and bump that to 02x then. All right. That leaves us with a much more reasonable count of 4 then. Is there anything that we don't have on the list that anybody thinks should be a release blocker? All right. In that case, let's take a look at the Bootstrap provider. All right, looks like we have 9 that are open. Cloud-Init 18.4 is needed for CentOS for templating. I believe there's already an update in the pipeline for this. I don't know if that update's going to reach CentOS before Friday, so I'll just bump that to next. All right, ability to configure host name via Cloud-Init. I am not sure if this is something that we require for 0.1 though. Travis, do you have any better insight into that?
Unfortunately, I do not.
Andrew, maybe?
I don't, sorry.
Okay. All right. In that case, I'm going to go ahead and bump this one to next. All right. Let's see. Reconcile should set CA cert hashes instead of unsafe skip CA verification. There's a PR in flight for this already. Use controller runtime everywhere for consistency. I think at this point that's a nice to have. Support for machine images with pre-pulled container images from non-standard repos. This is something that we probably need. I'll go ahead and take an action item to follow up on this one. All right. Modify cert secret to be 1 secret per cert. We're already working on that one. Remove create kubeconfig secret. Okay, this is talking about moving it to the cluster controller, which is something that we're already tracking. Add owner ref to the kubeconfig secret. So I think that's something that would be nice to have, but I don't necessarily know if it's a release blocker since it's not a, it wouldn't require any type of API changes. All right, and add spec.cloud provider to kubeadm config. All right, this is talking about potentially easing the UX a little bit, but I don't necessarily know if we're going to get to it before Friday. Your thoughts, Vince?
Probably not.
All right, go ahead and bump this then. All right. And that brings us down to 4 there, including one that is pretty much a duplicate across the cluster API repo. All right. Any issues or anything that anybody thinks we might not be tracking for the release currently for the Bootstrap provider? All right. Any other topics? All right. In that case, thank you all and have a great day.